I'm Rod Giltaca. I'm the CEO of the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. The Canadian government is banning guns. But did they base their decision on real evidence? Or is the truth a lot different than Canadians think? We're about to find out. Good evening, and welcome to Gun Ban Canada Exposed. In this series, we examine the arguments used by the Liberal Party government to justify their controversial Bill C-71 and the massive May 1st gun ban. Tonight, we explore a common question that's simple to ask but requires a relatively long answer. Why would anyone need a gun?
I asked him to ask the same question I'm asking myself all the time, and I'm asking the people of Toronto. Why does anyone in Toronto need a handgun?
Whoever needs those weapons anyway, I don't know.
Why does anyone in this city need to have a gun at all?
Anti-gun groups and governments benefit from the simplicity of this question and the length of time it takes to answer it. Fortunately for us tonight, we do have some time to take a close look at it. But first, let's understand what kinds of firearms Canadians can own and the legal or, let's say, legitimate reasons to acquire and possess them. In Canada, there are three classifications of firearms: non-restricted, restricted, and prohibited. Non-restricted are the least regulated class. These are typically rifles and shotguns for a hunting or sporting purpose. Then there's restricted, which are handguns and a variety of rifles and shotguns for various reasons. And finally, there's prohibited. These are firearms that are considered too dangerous to own. These are fully automatic firearms, so actual machine guns, very short handguns, and again, a wide variety of other firearms for a variety of reasons, and sometimes for no demonstrable reason at all. The only people who can possess prohibited firearms are law enforcement, military, and some people or companies like movie armorers and such. Prohibited firearms are not in general circulation in Canada, and they haven't been for decades. Now that we know how firearms are classified, we can talk about why we can own them. Canadians can currently own non-restricted and restricted firearms. The Canadian Firearms Program tells us there are 4 legitimate reasons to acquire and or possess a non-restricted firearm. Those are hunting, target or sport shooting, collecting, and inheritance. When it comes to restricted firearms, there's 3 legitimate reasons: target shooting, collecting, and inheritance. Because you can't hunt with a restricted firearm in Canada, therefore use at an approved range only. Notice that self-defense wasn't mentioned as a legitimate reason to own a firearm. This is the position of the bureaucracy in Canada. So it's the RCMP and politicians that tell us that self-defense is not a legitimate reason, but yet the law says it is. Sections 20, 28, and 117 of the Firearms Act make specific references to and form regulations around the use of firearms for protection of life. We'll talk about this in detail a little later. Coming back to our legitimate or approved reasons, the first is hunting. For our purposes tonight, we don't need to cover this because most people understand this fairly well. According to the Canadian Firearms Safety Course Student Manual, firearms have been in common use in Canada since the 1500s. When it comes to more modern firearms like semi-automatic rifles and shotguns, they've been around for more than 80 years in Canada. That includes AR-15s and other military-style firearms. The fact is, these kinds of firearms are nothing new in Canada. In the last few decades, sport shooting has exploded in our country. In fact, there are more people licensed to own handguns, so restricted license holders, than there are Canadians playing organized hockey. Many people don't know that because the media doesn't cover shooting sports in Canada. And while there are around 621,000 registered hockey players, over 2.2 million Canadians hold a non-restricted firearms license. I'll say that again. 3 times as many people have a firearms license than play organized hockey in Canada. So when people say there's no gun culture in Canada, they couldn't be more wrong. The most important thing for non-gun owners to understand, and understand clearly, is that firearm ownership isn't about owning meaningless objects or choosing an activity to pass the time. It's infinitely deeper than that. It's a critical part of this community's identity. Their relationships are with other gun people. Gun clubs and competitions are where they volunteer their time. It's where they invest their money. It's the skills they develop. Many times it's their business or their career. If we can establish anything in this episode, it's that firearm ownership is intrinsically important to the people who own firearms. When we come back, We'll look at a few real-world examples to help you understand their perspective. So stay with us. Before the break, we talked about the legitimate reasons that Canadians can own firearms and what kinds of firearms they can own. We also talked about how much firearms mean to the people who own them. During the filming of the television show, the CCFR's Canada Downrange, we met Morgan Andreasen and Mark Wong from Chilliwack, British Columbia. They played a role in developing a new shooting league called DSS Match.
Hi, my name is Mark Wong. I am a practicing dentist. I was actually a late participant. I was always a bench shooter until I met Morgan, actually. And we started competing in these matches at Thompson Mountain. And when I was at Thompson, DSS started, and it was a very, very good thing because we're getting a lot of shooters like myself who are new to shooting two-gun type competitions.
There had been an ongoing tactical rifle circuit at Thompson Mountain, and over the years it was getting larger and larger. Back in about 2015, we noticed that a lot of people were starting to come out, and we felt that it would be best if we got more structure in order to make sure that people could participate safely and to pitch it to other clubs. So probably 7 or 8 of us got together and talked about this, and in the end we ended up starting a formal society. So we had to have a mission statement and all the roles and responsibilities that go into that. And from there it flowed that we came up with a safety qualifier, came up with codified rules for competition, and went out and ultimately pitched it to a number of different clubs. Early 2012, 2013, we started noticing that we were going from 20 to 30 people to matches, and we're starting to get 40, 50, 60.
It's a very great community effort. People loved coming out. Because I was most centered in Chilliwack, the volunteers that came out were amazing. We always had to do a setup the night before the actual match because the match was very complex, the stages. And when I designed the stages, we had all these people, 20 people, 30 people would come up and help set up, and it was a fantastic thing. The spirit was great.
Prior to the OIC, the year before, we had 13 matches around the Lower Mainland at 4 different clubs. And practice nights that were held by all the different clubs. 800 people on our mailing list. We had 250 members of the actual society who had paid dues to the society to participate as part of this. It was a thriving community. It was growing leaps and bounds. I mean, we were having to run 4, 5, 6 case qualifiers a year and constantly getting emails and Facebook messages from people who were really excited and interested in participate in a dynamic shooting sport. May 1st, the OIC came down and prohibited the AR-15, which is the de facto primary firearm that people use for these sorts of competitions. It's called the modern sporting rifle for just that. With the prohibition of the AR-15 and many other rifles, it really pretty much almost killed the sport.
It's a very, very disillusioning thing. It's a lot of money that people have put in, not just myself. And now basically money that's just going to be gone. It's not a good thing.
5 years, thousands of hours of work, countless conversations and commitments to build a thriving, safe, lawful, inclusive community. Gone in an instant. And for what? Are the gang shootings in downtown Toronto going to stop now? Is the suicide rate going to go down? These are important questions, and Canadians should be interested in the answers. When we come back, we'll meet Amanda Fisher, a mother of 2 from Alberta and another great representative of the firearms community. Stay with us. Amanda Fisher was ranked 5th in Canada in her division at the IPSC, the International Practical Shooting Confederation. The IPSC is one of the largest handgun competition organizations in the world. More than 200,000 people compete in 89 countries. Firearms aren't a hobby to Amanda, they're part of who she is.
Stand by!
IPSC is the world's largest shooting association. For me, it is a handgun competition. 7 months out of the year, I spend 2 or 3 weekends a month traveling across the province and even across the country competing. The other 5 months of the year, I spend loading ammo or practicing at the range. All of my downtime, or most of my downtime, I spend at the range practicing. In 2018, I became the ladies provincial champion in my division, in the production division. I am the 5th lady in Canada in production division. In 2020, I am, the production ladies champion and also the overall lady champion in Alberta, and the 8th person in Alberta in my division out of all male and female competitors. I was competing in 3-gun until the OIC came along, and now I've had to retire my AR-15. So I no longer compete in 3-gun until I can get my AR-15 back out of the safe. Firearm ownership for me, it wasn't big in my life before 2015. Now it's my husband hunts. I shoot competitively. My oldest son shoots competitively with me. My youngest likes to take his rifle to the range and he likes to target shoot. Like, it's a family affair. It's part of who we are as a family. It's part of us. It's us.
Ryan Stacey is one of Canada's top competitive marksmen, and another great example of a good, hardworking Canadian whose very identity is a passion and respect for firearms.
My name's Ryan Stacey. Yeah, I spent 23 years in the Army Reserve out here in BC. The DCRA started in 1868, I think, or maybe even a few years before that. The DCRA runs service rifle. It's been going for a long time, and it's run now primarily with a semi-auto like an AR-15 or one of the SIG rifles. It has to be accurate because it's an accuracy game, but primarily the AR-15 for the last 40 years or so. Over my shooting career, I've had pretty good success at the DCRA service rifle matches. I've won them 6 times in a row. That's the most anybody's ever won them overall. I hold the highest score, and I'm also one of 7 people in the Dominion of Canada Service Conditions Hall of Fame. People get involved with all kinds of stuff throughout their life, and for me, shooting was it. And when I joined the military, service rifle became part of my life. It was really what drove me to be better. The things I learned from shooting service rifle in the military are things that I've taken into business and my everyday life, and have really made a huge difference in my life. Having all that stuff taken away basically is kind of earth-shattering to me, because it's so much deeper than just the shooting part of it. When you're in the military, in the reserves, you don't get a lot of time to practice on your own. So for me, getting to that elite level was solely dependent on me practicing with my own firearm. So the amount of hours I put in with my own guns was literally probably thousands and thousands of hours to get to that elite level. And yeah, now I can't do any of it.
So we've seen 2 more examples of good, productive Canadians who own firearms, and that passion is central in their lives. This is the true face of the firearms community, but it's the reality that you'll never see from the mainstream media. Take a minute and ask yourself why. Also, so far, everyone we've featured owns and responsibly uses AR-15s. Contrary to what Justin Trudeau tells the Canadian public, there is a use and there is a place for these firearms in Canada, and there has been for over 50 years. When we come back, we'll explore the controversial question, can a Canadian use a firearm to defend themselves? So you'll definitely want to stay with us. There's an interesting phenomenon in Canada. It's the idea that defending yourself from assault, rape, or murder is somehow morally wrong. Canadians have been convinced that they have no right to protect themselves or others, while at the same time we're being told that we do in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This contradiction has taken decades to materialize, and this belief is so pervasive that in some corners of Canadian society you can't even have a conversation about it. Somehow, we've arrived at a point in our history where we can't even talk about reasonable subjects in a reasonable manner. In March 2015, Prime Minister Stephen Harper made these comments. "My wife's from a rural area. Gun ownership wasn't just for the farm, it was also for a certain level of security when you're a ways from immediate police assistance." There's nothing unreasonable about his comment, but immediately the media was on full attack. The idea that someone could consider defending themselves against a criminal attack should it occur seemed to be the most objectionable thing these elites had heard in years.
For a Prime Minister of Canada to suggest that we have firearms to protect ourselves from our fellow citizens was unbelievable. We have always, as a culture, accepted the fact that we have an ability to have firearms legally for hunting, for target practice, for collecting, but never so that we can shoot our fellow citizens who may knock on the door or want to come in unwelcome.
The privilege and arrogance of what we just saw is astounding. The truth is, Canadians do have the right to defend themselves. And what kind of country would we be if we denied that?
Well, that myth has been perpetuated by the authorities, by the media, because in general, the authorities feel, in my view, that they have the sole preserve on the use of force in our society, which is not true. Canadians absolutely have the right to defend themselves with firearms and by any other means necessary. There's nothing in the criminal code that prevents someone from taking up arms to defend themselves. There's ample evidence and anecdotal experiences of people who have done so and have not run afoul of the law in any way. So within our society, there are various groups of people who live in areas that are more secure or less secure than others. Arguably, the most secure residence in this country is 24 Sussex Drive, the Prime Minister's residence. And yet, when Jean Chrétien was Prime Minister, an individual breached the security, armed RCMP all around his home, got into his home and into his bedroom while he was there with his wife, Alain, and he was compelled to take up a weapon to defend himself within that highly protected area. So really, when you look at it, there's nowhere in Canada where an individual might not be or can reliably not be confronted by criminal violence and not have to take up some sort of weapon to defend themselves, be it a soapstone carving, as in the case of Jean Chrétien, or a firearm, or a poker from the fireplace. The right to the security of person, to not be harmed, to not have our lives taken, is there a more fundamental right?
Many anti-gun people will deny that you can use a firearm for defensive purposes. They'll even say that having a gun makes you less safe. Interestingly, in episode 3, we highlighted one of the most significant studies available on the firearms issue, called Priorities for Research to Reduce the Threat of Firearm-Related Violence. It was commissioned by President Obama in cooperation with the Centers for Disease Control. It found that studies that directly assess the effect of actual defensive uses of guns have found consistently lower injury rates among gun-using crime victims compared with victims who used other self-protective strategies. Whether or not a person would use a firearm to protect their own life here in Canada or someone else's, the criminal code sets out strict rules on how someone can deploy force in self-defense, regardless if it's a firearm or a pipe wrench. Now let's ask ourselves a couple of honest questions. Do violent home invasions and other random acts of extreme violence happen in Canada? Yes, they do. Sometimes. Does owning a firearm automatically make you immune from violent assault? No. Is it a physical reality that having a firearm can save your life? Absolutely yes. Is protecting yourself or your loved one from violent attack morally wrong? Absolutely not. And those that think it is are free to live by their own beliefs, but shouldn't be allowed to impose those beliefs on others. There's a lot more to say on this specific topic, but we have to get back to our original question. Why would anyone need a gun? And the answer is many reasons. And all of them are good and sufficient. Canadians use guns for hunting, sport shooting, collecting, and inheritance. Competent gun owners also know that they are a tool that could save their lives if they needed to. In Canada's vast wilderness areas, firearms are also essential for protection from natural predators. They are an incredibly unique piece of property that fulfills multiple roles in the lives of people who own them. What other piece of metal and wood or plastic can be so important and mean so many different things to so many different people? Guns are not golf clubs and they're not hockey sticks. They're a feature of free societies and a measure of societal equity. They're far more important than the uninformed think, and they shouldn't be surrendered for purely political reasons. Next time on Gun Ban Canada Exposed, why is it our entire system seems incapable of providing us true information on the gun debate? Why can we never find the correct answer as a country? What's stopping us? We'll have a close look at this national dilemma in episode 6, so we'll see you then.
Closed captioning for Gun Ban Canada is brought to you by Bushnell, TNT Gunworks, Trinity Long Range, and P&D Enterprises.